Hey guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And I am your co-host, Ray Russell, here once again to join you on that ride through wrestling history with the man himself. Let's bring him back on. Here he is. Welcome back, Bob Roop.
Well, thanks, Ray. It's good to be with you again, man, on the air. You listeners out there, we wouldn't be here again. We wouldn't be here without you. So thanks for being there. We got some good stuff to talk about again today.
We certainly do. We are coming off your big run here, 1976 Florida, Bob, your team with the Ortons, holding the tag team title not once but twice during the same run. I don't know how anybody can pull that off. Only Bob Roop. Of course, you team first with Bob Orton Jr., then Bob Orton Sr., and the Gladiator appears in the middle of all of that, the shenanigans with the Masked Man as well. And then later on, you go into that big feud with Steve Keirn. Great feedback on that episode. People, boy, they love to hate you. They hate to love you. But talk about some heel heat there. The heel heat you got during that feud with Steve Keirn was second to none. But that feud was coming to a close as we ended the last program we did together, Bob. So we're going to kind of pick up where we left off there, and then we're going to play a little name game. I'm going to throw some names at you and see if you have any memories.
The feedback that we got, are there people that are mad today because of that angle 40 years ago?
No, they love the angle. They just hate that they love it because it's not cool to support such an angle, but they thought it was, very clever, especially for the time. It was very much ahead of its time. The elaborate details put into that were far above what we would see in commonplace 1970s booking in a wrestling promotion. So people were just the people that didn't know about it in the past, very much amazed by it and everything that went into it. And it only took that one episode of that one promo to really get it going. But wow, it was off to the races afterwards. And people were just astonished that you guys would think of such a strong angle to pull. And the fact that it got over, that shocked nobody. And you guys took it on the road for several months.
I'm sitting here reflecting on even asking you that question because, it's been all those years ago. Times have changed, too, because now we've had national figures disrespect the military and talk about Medal of Honor winners as being disgraceful. So I look like I was a trendsetter, but I was way, way ahead of my time. And I apologize for that back then, and I still apologize for it because, being a veteran myself, I certainly had my father being a Bronze Star Award for World War II service. I certainly wouldn't do anything to denigrate, our great veterans.
Right.
And, I was in Arlington for my dad's funeral and my uncle's interment. The pomp and ceremony, the 21-gun salute, and all the rich history, and he's laid to rest. And on every side in Arlington are tombstones of the fallen, of people who've given, many of them gave everything. They gave their life for their country. And so you talk about being in the middle of honor. You're talking about the most honorable place in our country is right there, where all the people the fallen who gave their life and were willing to give their life to. My dad wasn't killed in the war, but when he did pass away, he did qualify to be interred there. So that's what he asked for. He wanted to be buried there. But with all the fallen who were killed in battle or whenever or died in the service, what a place of honor. But anyway, I'm glad that our fans appreciated it for what it was. And again, I did apologize, so I don't have any remorse on that angle. So
right. Well, you're just working the gimmick, just doing your job, just earning your pay. So
yes.
I'm not mad at you, Bob. You actually go on the road with Steve Keirn throughout the summer there, July, August, September, all the way into October. The feud begins coming to a close. You guys are still working each other loosely. In fact, you and Bob Orton Jr. even going to cost Bob Backlund and Steve Keirn the tag titles at one point to the Hollywood Blondes. Now, remember, if you guys go back, and the last episode, it was actually, or maybe 2 episodes ago now, it was Backlund and Keirn that defeated you and Bob Orton Sr. for the tag belts, the Florida tag titles. But now you guys, payback is a bitch, I guess they would say, as you guys cost Backlund and Keirn the tag titles. They dropped the belts to Jerry Brown and Buddy Roberts, the Hollywood Blondes, here in October, I do believe, of 1976. So still loosely feuding with Steve Keirn here. In fact, Keirn going to team with Jack Brisco. And speaking of the Briscoes, boy, you just keep finding something to do with your time here. It starts off the beginning of the year, you and Bob Orton Jr. form a team and you take out Mike Graham, the promoter's son, Mike Graham taken out. And he's out of commission for around a month or so. And here we go. We're going to end the year the same way we started it. Bob Orton Jr. and Bob Roop teaming once again, but this time you guys take out the former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Jack Brisco. Boy, you guys don't settle for anything less than the best.
Oh, yeah, we were just practicing on Mike. We have practiced, we were setting up our main event for someone like Jack. Why cripple a guy who's not the world champion, unless it's only just a practice. So, yeah, I'm just kidding, but that didn't work out. To do it with Mike was one thing. That got Bobby and myself, that got us established with a personal feud, especially with not just with Mike, but more importantly with Eddie.
Right.
Because Eddie was probably he was like an all-star, having been there from the early days of that promotion, taken off and still being there, never having left really. He was so established, he was so over. So to have him as part of getting on TV and talking about us in interviews about being upset with us and wanting to get some payback on us, and then him getting different partners to help him do it, what a way to get us over. And that was another thing when I talked about on our last episode about thinking that Eddie was taking care of me, was protecting me. I think this was another example. There was a way that he could protect me and build me without having to worry about Dusty getting involved with it. And like I say, I respect Dusty. His career was fantastic. But Dusty, like I say, any heat that came up, if he was in the dressing room waiting to go on and he heard a big roar out there, his first question he'd ask was, "Who's out there now? Who is that getting all that?" If people are screaming and yelling and booing, who's getting all that heat? He'd want to know. He'd make sure to notice who came in the dressing room.
Well, it's kind of funny you say that because I see here shortly after you guys put Jack Brisco on the shelf, we go to Miami, November the 3rd to be exact, and Dusty Rhodes, the Florida heavyweight champion, defeating Bob Roop in a random match because, as you said, he must have been listening there in that studio. Who was it that just took out Jack Brisco? I got to book myself against them, baby. And so the Mac and Dream going over on Bob Roop there on November 3rd, right in the middle of your feud with the Briscoes, but you're also doing a tag team title feud at the same time because you take the Briscoes out, you take Jack Brisco down, but you also take the belts off of Kern and Bob Backlund, as I said, and the Hollywood Blondes steal the win. They get the tag team titles, but you and Bob Orton are the ultimate heels. You're the heels. So you're not friends with the baby faces, but you're also not friends with the other heels. And so you guys go up to the Hollywood Blondes and say, yeah, congratulations. You're the new tag team champions, but you should be thanking us. We deserve a title shot. So the heel Orton and Roop, demanding a title shot from the Hollywood Blondes, enter the brand new tag team of Mike Graham and Ken Lucas into the fold. And now you guys are going to have a round robin matchup, all three teams having matches with one another. I believe November 1st it was. At the end of the night, it's Mike Graham and Ken Lucas walking out the new tag team champions, dethroning the Hollywood Blondes. But it's not too long after that, you and Orton win back the belts you won at the beginning of the year. You're champions again, ending the year.
Yeah, and that was nicely done because we didn't have to beat them in that tournament. They put the belts on the Hollywood Blonde, and that way they didn't have to lose it to us until we got into a single match later on, or like just the two of our me and Bobby against them. But yeah, I thought that was booked very well.
I looked through your career here at 76. This may be the most fun anybody could ever have in a single year. And I'm not just saying that because I'm your co-host or I'm sitting here talking with you. I defy anybody to go out there and listen to the rundown of everything you did here in 76 and tell me this isn't one of the most fun runs anybody has ever had. You start off the year taking out the promoter's son, feuding with the promoter, Eddie Graham, and his son, Mike Graham. You get to do the mask gimmick. Everybody always wanted to do the mask gimmick where you get oh my God, it's Bob Roop under the hood. You get the leg injury. Now that part wasn't fun, but you get to work it into the angle. You make the comeback. You're the tag team champion. And of course, all this is coming off of runs with Thunderbolt and Dusty and everything. But then you go into the huge feud with Steve Kern, selling out and just having a great time and all these gimmick matches and just beating the crap out of one another, especially you getting pummeled, I'm sure, by Kern a time or two. But you get to work that awesome angle all summer into the fall. And when that's over with, normally somebody would just kind of right off into the sunset, but not Bob Roop. Nope. You go back, you find Bobby Orton, you injure the former world champion Jack Brisco, and you get to get to do the old heel gimmick where the heels challenge the heels. And we don't get to see that a whole lot, but when we used to watch that as fans, as kids, oh, you always loved when two heels collide. Like, oh, which guy's the bigger asshole? Which guy's going to get it here? And you're out here with the Hollywood Blondes. Hey, guys, we should be the tag team champions. And so from January and we're moving into December here, you've had a hell of a year. I'm just enjoying it.
When I look back on it now, like I say, all the years since that time, I kind of faded, of course, but looking at it myself over the past a month or so, looking at that time period, yeah, that was actually the most significant year of my career, even though I wasn't booking, in terms of the quality of the matches, who I worked against, and it didn't matter about wins and losses. What it mattered was all of that stuff. All the stuff we did drew money. Of course, now having Dusty there, of course, is a nice buffer, because he's going to draw on his own. But with people like us, me and Bobby, against the Briscoes, or against Mike and Steve Kern, Mike Graham, Steve Kern, or Steve Kern and Bob Backlund, whoever it might be, to have us in support on the card or as co-main events or whatever, it almost guaranteed a sellout. And the houses that year were very, very good. I talked about Steve last week. I talked about, or in a former show, I talked about Steve Kern and I should have been making $3,000 a week. That was just the way it was. I did hear the story, a little sidestep here. Mm-hmm. I did hear the story about Stomper, Archie Goldie's Stomper going on and throwing a check for $2,200. Right.
I think you said he didn't cash it, right?
Yeah.
I don't get the logic of that one.
Yeah. And I thought, well, I remember checks over $1,000, of course, but I remember any over $2,000, not in Florida. Mm-hmm. But Stomper had worked other places, like New York, for example, where they paid better, or, they paid more fairly. So he realized he was getting screwed, and he didn't like it. He wasn't going to take it. So I hats off to him for that. Again, I would have cashed a check.
Sure. I think most of us would have.
Well, like
I'm worth more than this, but I'll take it.
Well, it was after Frankie Kane blasted Roy Shire, and Frankie ran out and still in his wrestling gear, ran out and jumped his car and drove to the bank to cash a check before Roy woke up and canceled it. Because Shire probably would have taken it and been glad as long as he didn't knock his teeth out. He said, "Well, I'll take getting knocked out for $1,500 or whatever I managed to steal from Frankie Kane here."
Lucky for Mephisto, there weren't cell phones back then, so Shire couldn't jump on there real quick and shut down the check or whatever. Just, oh man, that's a great story though. I've heard that in the past. I'm sure it's in his book in regards to his altercation with Roy Shire. Mephisto did not take anybody's crap. And, no. Shire, one of the guys that certainly, I don't want to say he paid for it because, he, like you said, he took a good chunk of change, I'm sure, out of Mephisto's pocket over the course of his time in the territory. So I'm not just saying maybe he had it coming. I'm saying, it was probably worth it to Shire to take a shot with all the money that he took from not just Mephisto, but whoever. And that goes for a lot of other promoters. I'm not just trying to attack Roy Shire in that facet. There's a lot of promoters that certainly took more than their share. But, that's just the name of the game. That's the business. That's, I think, why a lot of people wanted to be the promoter. They wanted to control the money, which makes sense. You can control your own money. But we come to the end of 76. You're going to stick around in the Florida territory, Bob, into February, though. You're going to continue to team with Bob Orton Jr. most of the way. You guys will lose the belts to the Brisco brothers here in the early part of 77. So Jack getting a little revenge, teaming with brother Jerry, defeating Orton and Roop for the Florida Tag Team title belts. You're also going to work quite a bit with a newcomer to the Florida territory at this point, Kevin Sullivan. And we had a whole episode on Kevin recently after his passing, R.I.P. Kevin Sullivan. But I just noticed here, because you said you had worked with Kevin some when you went to San Francisco. And when you ultimately got the job as booker in San Fran, you thought of Kevin, a young, hungry lion up-and-comer who was, striving to do more. And so you thought of Kevin and maybe made the call, or maybe Kevin made the call to you. I don't remember how that worked, but Sullivan winds up out there. You guys, popped the town, popped San Francisco out there not too long after that time period. But it's kind of funny how you just happen to run into Kevin just a couple months before you leave Florida here, and you do quite a bunch of matches against some tag team matches, Sullivan teaming with the likes of Mike Graham and a Brisco or two. So it's fun just looking through the results here as we wind down your time, trying to see if any names pop up to me in your last few matches here, but it's mostly more of the same. Lots of, makes sense, Brisco matches. Of course, you guys doing the job on the way out. And right. I'm not sure if Bobby Orton sticks around in Florida, if he goes off somewhere else at this point, but I do know, Bob Roop, you leave in February 1977. You leave off to San Francisco. Now, we talked about how you got to San Francisco. We got a 3-piece story on that. You guys go back and check that out in the archives. Great story on the entire run, your run in the San Francisco territory, how you became the booker, all of your dealings with promoter Roy Shire, your feud with Kevin Sullivan, everything else going on behind the scenes, and just everything in between. We have lots of great stories there. Check it out. Again, a 3-piece archive of the San Francisco run of Bob Roop. But so we talked about how you got there. Let's talk about how you left Florida, Bob. Do you remember, was this just Eddie Graham coming to you and saying, time's up? Was this you trying to find something new to do? Because it seems like they found a ton for you here, but they have to be running low on fuel at some point. Whose idea was this? Do you recall whose idea it was to move you out of the Florida territory after you'd been there more than 2 years at this point?
I think I was ready to go. I had been there, like you say, for a long time, and one of the problems we talk about the highlights. One of the problems that was associated with that whole run, and I mentioned it several times, was the pay. It's a problem when you have on one side, the ring side, the actual performance side, on stage side, which is a rousing success. You have people screaming and yelling, the buildings are full. Of course, the promotion could claim that Dusty Rhodes drew all that money. But I know that after the first for several months of being Steve Keirn, anytime we were in a match, I'm telling you, the buildings were sold out. We should have been making more money. Well, that ate at me the whole time. It bugged me because I knew it's something I mentioned on one of our very first times together was riding down the road in the car with boys. And the one thing that you always could guarantee that was going to get talked about was getting screwed on payoffs. And that worked everywhere that I went. That's one of the reasons I quit riding with people and went with myself. I didn't want to be hearing that crap in my own career, especially after this time. When that situation came up, I left. If I wasn't happy with my payoffs, I just gave my notice. That was the only thing you could do, really. And I mean, if you give your notice and say they offer you more money, that's one thing. But actually, it probably wouldn't have. But that was a byproduct. So knowing that year I'm talking about, that you just mentioned, I think I made $48,000 that year. That's less than $1,000 a week for not just doing all that. I mean, you got all the travel, you have the risk. We talked about getting shot at, people pulling guns on me, and Bobby and I had tons of heat. We had people chase us all the time in the cars when we would leave. And so, I didn't even mention that, but it was just, we had to be very careful about leaving buildings and look, we'd have to look for, ambushes, people waiting for us. With all that in mind, to be making less than $1,000 a week, that ate at me, and I knew it was wrong. You can have all this wonderful success on one side and have this complete negativity on the other. That in my case, it ate away at my self-respect because I took it. I didn't ever go on and say, hey, I want more money. I should have, but I didn't. It seemed like nobody else was. Jack Brisco wasn't. So, I mean, if you have top guys that aren't doing it, when I became a top guy, I didn't know if that would work. I didn't think about it. So my only option was to leave. So when it came time to leave, I was ready to go. And it's telling that I went as far away from Florida as I could without getting booked in Hawaii or Japan. I went to the West Coast. I went, way down in the Panhandle in Florida, all the way to the West Coast, where I had an apartment where I could see the Pacific Ocean, you're as far away from Florida as you can get. So
right. You made a better choice this time, or at least as far as the scenery goes, a better choice this time around as far as when you left the Florida territory. You had more options this time. You'd really been a proven commodity by this point. You'd worked pretty much everyone, and as you pointed out before too, you've had experience in booking now, working as an associate type booker with Harley Race.
Right, and with Louis Gillette and
yes,
a couple of different guys. Yeah, so that was one thing. But the other thing was we had talked about being in Amarillo. I'm not segueing here. It feeds back into something I talked about before. In Amarillo, one of the reasons I wanted to leave Amarillo was because being on the road all the time, but also what that road was. That road was just pavement through the wide open spaces of cactus and tumbleweeds and scorpions crawling across the road and, nothing to see, nothing.
Let me ask you a question, Bob. I'm sorry to cut you off, but you just jogged my memory on something I wanted to ask you a while back when we were doing the Mid-South episodes. Most people who worked the Mid-South territory for Bill Watts have said that was the most grueling road time, the most grueling trips from town to town. You put it over as not a big deal, not too bad when you were working in the Mid-South territory. A lot of people said they were nearly driven crazy just based on the driving they had to do for those towns, calling it one of the worst in the history of the business. And you didn't really sell it that way, but you really sell Amarillo that way. Like, oh my God, the roads. And I get it. It's the desert down there. Was it very similar in regards to the hours on the road up in Mid-South? Was it different to you? Was it just the scenery being different and more things maybe to do? I mean, I'm just curious because I've heard so many people over the last, I don't know, ever since the old Shoot interviews came out anyway, so many of the guys from the 80s that worked for Bill Watts say that was just the most grueling, terrible time they ever had was the road trips in the Mid-South territory. Do you remember Mid-South being that bad? Because you tell us about how Amarillo was rough, right? Driving from city. We documented the hours you were on the road in Amarillo. And of course, you were lucky, as you said, to see a scorpion every once in a while crossing the road. But other than that, I mean, that's all tumbleweed maybe. Yeah. And that's pretty much all you got. But what was it different in Mid-South, or do you remember the Mid-South trips not being so bad?
Well, they were if you lived in New Orleans. Well, what I did was I traveled by myself. I had talking about adding misery to absolute despair. I had let my automobile insurance lapse when we were with the Poffos because I couldn't afford to make my payments, and I wrecked my car. I had a 2-year-old Pontiac Grand Prix, beautiful car, and I wrecked it. So ended up with a little Datsun, the smallest car. It's just basically a 2-seater. It did have a back seat, but no wrestler I knew could fit back there.
Right.
Unless it was little people. But I went by myself, and I drove by myself. And when I got to Mid-South, I was seriously, I don't want to say depressed. What had happened in Knoxville of having all the boys, basically ostracized, us guys who went opposition. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, nobody will talk to us anymore. Well, I lost a lot of respect, or any respect I had for my colleagues, because you had guys that were complaining about payoffs, and yet when you try to do something that might enhance those payoffs, where the wrestlers might have some power, they all turn against you because they're afraid of the promotion. I went in there with I was depressed. I mean, I was broke. I went in there. I remember I didn't even get an apartment for about a month. Asked Buddy Landell and Bob Orton Jr. if I could sleep on the couch in their apartment for just a night at a time. I didn't move anything in. Mm-hmm. I would just come in in both places. By the time we got back to the town, Buddy's girlfriend and Bobby Orton's wife would be in bed. It wasn't like they had to get up and greet me. I'd just sleep on the couch and I'd get up early and leave. But it was just to save me having to get a motel. I remember I kept my checks for about a month. I remember the first time I went, maybe 5 weeks. And when I went to the bank, I had $17,000 I deposited. And
wow.
From there, because it's good money out there. And I went on from there. I brought my girlfriend out, the girl I married, and I brought her out. Well, we lived now back to the point. We moved to Alexandria, Louisiana, which is halfway between Baton Rouge and Shreveport. So leaving from there, it made every trip shorter. Not to New Orleans. New Orleans was closer from Baton Rouge, but it still wasn't that far. I was halfway to Shreveport, I was halfway to Baton Rouge, and all the other towns kind of fit in. So, yeah, you spend a lot of time on the road, but, you're making money, too. I was making, like I say, $1,500 a week.
Right.
Easy, at least that. I didn't mind. And also, I was hungry again because I was broke. I had to borrow that car I'm talking about. I paid $4,000 for it. It was a car that the dealership let prospective buyers drive that car as a way to test the car to see if they liked it. So it had, I don't know, 800 miles on it, and I bought it pretty cheap. I think I paid $4,000 for it, but I had to borrow the money from my dad. So here I've been in the wrestling business, and I've made a lot of money, and I'm in my 30s. I'm relegated having to borrow money from my dad just to get wheels. My self-respect wasn't really hurt, but because I tried to do what I thought was right, but my morale was certainly down. I don't want to say clinically depressed, but I wasn't a happy camper at all. Mm-hmm. So I really didn't mind the miles out there. Driving by myself, the gas mileage was, that car got 35, 40 miles a gallon.
Oh, that ain't bad.
So, yeah, I didn't mind and got used to being by myself. And I liked that part too. So no, but I can see what guys are talking about. But you know what? The thing was in Louisiana, there's all kinds of cities. There's all kinds of things to see. You could stop every 10 miles at just about anywhere in the state and stop and get some boudin, or that nice sausage thing they make out there in Louisiana. It was civilized. Texas out there where we were in West Texas, that had changed much from back in the Wyatt Earp days,
Right.
So, I understand what guys are saying, though. Yeah, now let's extrapolate. We talked about Amarillo just a few seconds ago, but to be out there in California, in San Francisco, you could be on the beach in the morning, and you could be at Lake Tahoe in late afternoon skiing.
Right.
Because, they had a mountain. Lake Tahoe was up in the mountains, and even in the summer, they had snow on the mountaintop. You could go skiing. Mm-hmm. So you talk about having a cosmopolitan city like San Francisco. We talked about the adventures with Chris Colt.
Sure.
Seeing the sights. And you talk about Chris had some very unusual sights to see. In fact, he created a lot of them himself.
Yeah.
He was a sight of, we both love Chris, and so, rest in peace, Chris. One of the more fun guys I ever had spent time with in the business. Talk about interesting, but
to say the least.
Compared to San Francisco, I can see why Patterson and
Stevens
Ray stayed out there for as long as they could. What a beautiful place! If you're making $1,000 or $2,000 a week, you got a beautiful house, and you spend very little time in the car. You got that nice weather year round. San Francisco wasn't as hot as L.A. It was more temperate. And being right on the ocean, you had that ocean breeze coming in to cool things off.
It's amazing how different all the territories were because, well, obviously they were all built differently, but they were in such different areas of the United States. I don't think a lot of people that just look at the wrestlers and how they perform in the ring think about everything going on behind the scenes and everything you guys put up with in regards to travel, especially back then. You guys aren't riding from town to town in a plane, right? You guys aren't getting these Uber rides and things of that nature. You guys are making it happen yourself. And I go back to a story I remember Stan Hansen telling after he broke Bruno's neck. He talks about going back for the return match at the Garden, or I don't think he was heading to Shea. It'd be awful if he was taking the subway. Can you imagine you're working Bruno Sammartino and you're on the subway headed to the matchup? But Stan talked about the people on the subway wanting to kill him. Well, he was like having to keep a guard up. He's just sitting here. And because where are we at? We're in New York City, and that's how you got around, at least, relatively easily anyway. So it's just crazy to think about all the different places. You talked about the Mid-South. Yeah, it's crazy driving, but there's things to do. You talked about Amarillo. Yeah, it's crazy driving, but there's nothing to do. San Francisco, closer trips and a whole lot to do. So it just seems like everybody, everything was so different.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the reasons when Roy Shire's promoters, his associate promoters for towns, came to me with a requesting that they would back any kind of takeover attempt. And, it wasn't like a political thing where you're going to assassinate the leader. It's a business thing. It's strictly business, finances, and
Right.
there's no charter that you're buying out or breaking or anything. So that's an idea of owning a promotion, like being like an Eddie Graham. But instead of being in Tampa, Florida, which is fine, Tampa's got all kinds of attractions, but San Francisco's got about 3 times as many. Imagine being in San Francisco where you own, have a big piece of a promotion that you can, use to make money with for as long as you want to, and you have a great life, like I say. If you have the business, you're probably not going to have time to go to Tahoe and to go, you're not going to be on the beach and at Tahoe that much, but still.
Right.
But yeah.
It's there. It's available to you if the opportunity exists.
Yes.
Yeah,
So that was a very attractive proposition.
Sure.
Very hard to turn.
I could see that. I could definitely see that. I mean, you got to go experience it for a while, at least for a year there in 77. So you leave Florida, you go off to San Francisco. We covered that at length. Again, 3 episodes worth of great stories there in regards to your run in San Francisco. But we're going to close up the story here this week in regards to your run in Florida. You leave in February 77. You're off to the West Coast. And so we're going to pivot the format of the episode now, Bob, and I'm just going to shoot some names at you. And maybe if you have any stories or memories of them, we can talk about them here. And basically what these are names. I've compiled a list of over 100 names, guys, that Bob's already been in contact with here by 1977 that we haven't really touched on yet, because Bob didn't really work them a whole lot or team with them a whole lot. So I started with your story. I started with the guys you should likely know most, but that doesn't mean you didn't hang around or see some of the crazy stuff that went on with these other guys. And so from time to time, I want to go back and revisit various names, and I want to start that here this week.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. So the first name on the docket, a name that everyone is familiar with if you watched wrestling in the 70s or even the 1980s, a huge name at the time. And I'm talking about the magnificent Don Muraco. Do you have any memories of Don Muraco?
Yeah, when Don came into Florida, he was a nice-looking guy, good build, good worker. He was not reserved, but he was had kind of a quiet side to him. He wasn't like Dusty, on stage in the dressing room. He was quiet, but his work was good. I'm pretty sure I worked against him. I do remember as far as personal interaction with Don, after I think it was my 3rd trip to Japan, I came back to through Hawaii. We always came back through Hawaii, and went through Hawaii, came back to Hawaii. I stopped there for a week. I had my girlfriend, or I should say partner, because we ended up getting married. I had her come from the United States to meet me, and we were there, and we ran into Don. I don't remember where, maybe on the beach, but we ran into him, and he turned out to be a really, he was almost like a host because he lived there. We got together several times at the beach, and but I remember specifically one time I had been training for about a year with the great Malenko. He and I had been running, and we did that also in Japan. So I wanted to, when we got to Hawaii, I wanted to go out running one day. Don was telling me about he was doing some running too at the time. So what we did was we went on we're just jogging, we're not setting any speed records, it's jogging. But we went around, we jogged from down on Oahu on the beach, down Waikiki Beach. We jogged around Diamond Head, and I believe it was 8 miles. And
wow.
we didn't stop. I mean, again, we were jogging. We were just
sure. You guys weren't Rocky and Apollo Creed running down the beach. I get you. You just taking your time.
But you're talking about over an hour without stopping, and we were able to talk while we were running too. But I remember that because I never knew any other wrestlers other than Malenko who could have that kind of conditioning. So you had guys that could exert tremendous energy for 30 seconds. But if it went 45 seconds, they'd turn into goo. because they'd run out of gas. They'd be, about coughing their lungs up because they'd be so out of breath. But so, yeah, I was impressed by that. You got to respect someone who takes care of themselves. I think he was taking time off. I don't know if he had any real reason to be in that kind of condition, but good guy, good talent, great talent. After that time, he went on to do much more than I did in my career. So, Don's a good guy. I wish him the best. And I know he's still out there, and I admire his career. It was a pleasant. What little contact I did have with him, most of the time around me was a heel, so right. We wouldn't be in the ring together. But a good guy and someone I'm glad. He's been in contact with me a little bit on Facebook. Mm-hmm. I was writing about how cold Michigan was, and he was writing about how nice it was in Waikiki.
Oh, I'm sure.
Back and forth for a few weeks, and that was kind of fun. But good guy and good career, and he's in Hawaii, and he's surfing if he wants to, or if he doesn't want to, whatever he wants to do, that's what he's doing.
Yeah, aloha, Don. If you're listening, just send us the plane tickets. We'll be out there.
Yes. So how can you find fault with it?
You certainly couldn't have asked for a better host than frickin' Don Muraco to show you around Hawaii. I'll tell you that, man. I'm sure you guys had a blast.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show, covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive watch-along series covering mini past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon-exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
Well, another guy was good to run into there, although he had changed a lot, was Sam Steamboat.
Oh, Sam Steamboat out there.
Yeah, he was in Florida when I first started.
Right. I remember the advice he gave you, yeah.
Never run, although he wasn't in Korea. Yeah, he wasn't in South Korea. So I put people to run in South Korea too, but I ran at him over there, and he had gone back and had gotten something on Waikiki Beach, some kind of a enterprise that was making, if you're on the beach in Waikiki, you're making money.
Sure.
And that had been his goal, I think, when he got into wrestling business. That had been his goal, was to do that. Now, I had mentioned this before, I think, but I want to mention it again. When he was in Florida, he had a Cadillac that was like 10, 12, 15 years old. That was one of the first the tail fin Cadillac, the first ones that had that real prominent tail fin in the back.
Yeah.
On both sides. He had one of those classics, and it was spotless. It was immaculate. It looked like one of the old Model Ts that they fix up and they make them all glittery, and they're in the car shows, and they look like they're brand new,
right? Yeah,
like they've been gold plated or something. Well, his car was spotless, in great condition, and he was driving it. I mean, it wasn't sitting in a garage.
Right.
And I just asked him one time. It had 400,000 miles on it. That's the point. It had 400,000 miles on it. And I asked him, well, how do you keep it? I said, have you replaced the engine? He said, no. I said, well, how do you keep it that way? He said, keep changing oil. Keep oil in it. He said,
I got to keep telling my wife that too, Bob. Got to change the oil.
Well, I want you to tell that story to kind of point out what I feel like is a mindset that he had. That he was able to do that kind of a thing with that car, that shows a certain kind of a value system and a mindset, a discipline to do that. But if he took that same sort of mindset and discipline towards generating that business in Hawaii,
right? Yeah,
then that's what he was successful in doing it. He wasn't quite as friendly. I don't know, maybe he's worried I was going to hit him up for a free whatever business was, but he was fine. He was appropriate.
Yeah.
But I was happy to see that he had made his dream come true. So I was happy to see that.
Well, that's kind of cool. Oh, King Curtis? Yeah.
Ironically, King Curtis went back there. King Curtis didn't do any of that stuff. King Curtis went down to the beach.
And sat there?
But basically, yeah, he took some surfboards down to the beach, and he started, he put a little cardboard sign out there saying rent, and they came up and they said, well, you can't do that. He did a thing where he took the officials, whoever they were, he took them to court and said that as a native Hawaiian, as a native of Hawaii, he had the right to have a concession there on the beach, and they gave it to him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When I was over there the one time when
Now, would that have been an actual legal thing to do, or was this more for his celebrity that they gave him this?
It was legal. I know. I liked it. He didn't even have like a stand. He would bring.
He just bring the surfboards and shove them in the sand and put a for rent sign up. Awesome. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, and the day I was over there, he was driving. He would drive from there. He would drive back to where he lived, was I don't know 20 miles, and then come back and forth. King did it slightly different. The reason I told this story, King did it quite a bit differently than Sam Steamboat did. He didn't put any serious 25 years of saving his money and discipline into it. He just bought a few surfboards and some paddle boards and made a sign and went into business for himself. But it worked.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, when he would pop back up, he actually got a job for a little bit there for the WWF, but his knees were so bad by that point, he couldn't get around. It was actually hard to watch. If you guys knew what you were watching when you go back and watch the film, this is back in 86 into the early part of 1987. He comes in to manage Kamala and Sika, the crazy jungle savages, managed by the crazy King Curtis character. But his knees were so shot, he couldn't even get in the ring with them. So they literally would have like the Friday, the Kim Chi character, the handler of Kamala, get in and do all the in-ring shenanigans. And the King Curtis would just kind of stand outside and direct traffic. He was there for maybe 6 months and, he's just said, I can't do this. I can't keep going. I can't get on and off these planes. My knees are done. And so that was pretty much. Yeah. And then, fast forward to the WCW in the mid 90s, Kevin Sullivan brings him in as sort of like the leader of a faction, but he never appeared. He's in this off camera, these vignettes they would shoot. He was never actually in the arenas, and he was always seated in a chair when he was doing these vignettes because, again, his knees were done. So it's gotta be warm to know that he made some friends somewhere to where he got some jobs from time to time, made a couple bucks. You talked about what he was doing in between, but at the same time, there's a guy who gave his body to the business, so to speak, and certainly his forehead. And he was basically immobile by the mid 80s.
I think if he was asked to look back and ask if he'd do anything different, I think I'm surmising that he would say no, because he had a great. I mean, as far as from what I could see, he had a great life. Yeah. I mean, over there in Australia, I don't know what drug he was doing, but he had something. I don't know if it was uppers or downers or what, but he had something that he had all the time. So he could control the way he felt. If you're smoking pot, a lot of people don't smoke pot to get high. Nowadays, there's a complete business where marijuana is legal as a pain relief. It's a relief for pain and for attention. It's very helpful. A lot of seniors who would never thought anybody that smoked pot was a hippie and a communist and should be executed. A lot of senior citizens have found gummies, and they have them that don't really have THC like marijuana, and they have extracts that help you sleep better and relax you and are good for your health, good for your physical health and also your psyche. So
I'm going to guess back then King Curtis was taking something a little more organic than gummies. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it was.
Yeah,
he offered me and Thunderbolt, our first time there, he offered us a hit of whatever it was. I think it was a pill of some kind, because we had heard it was acid, it was LSD. I was very leery about acid. I wasn't sure if I wanted to lose control of my intellect.
Right.
Where you can't control what's happening. Neither Thunderbolt and I, we both took whatever it was, and I think it was speed, because I remember Thunderbolt and I were eating in the hotel we stayed at in Melbourne, Australia, on a Sunday morning. We were eating breakfast. They had a breakfast buffet, and it was $21. This is back in 19.
Wow.
It was $21 for the buffet. I think I had a bowl of Jell-O, and Thunderbolt had 6 or 7 black olives. That's all we ate. Buffet. So I'm pretty sure it was speed. Because
some pretty expensive black olives, man.
Yeah. It was something that inhibited our appetite, but it never I never had any like acid type.
Well, that's an interesting experience for sure. Good old King Curtis.
Well,
His name's always popping up here on the show, so that's always fun. You know, you mentioned Sam Steamboat, and I didn't expect him to come back up here in the topic, so not on my list, but I got to ask the question since you mentioned the name Steamboat. Do you have any memories of working around Ricky Steamboat at all?
Yes. I remember working a couple matches. I worked several times with him. I remember a couple of them because he was new. He wasn't, if he was green, he was green in terms, I think, of experience and number of matches, but he was very talented. We had good matches. I wasn't a bit surprised when he went on to have the career that he did. Mm-hmm. He found the right place in the right time, at the right time to make a great career for himself.
You talked about him being a natural, basically, upon his debut, really, in his early matches working against you. But yeah, you're right. He really took off, got the push for Vince McMahon, had the Intercontinental title, the big epic match at WrestleMania 3 in front of 93,000 fans, dethrones the Macho Man, and then later goes on to defeat Ric Flair for the NWA World title as well.
Well, I'm glad. I think he's a class guy. I've never heard anything untoward about him. I mean,
right.
With Savage and Flair and different people, you know, there's something, and me. I mean, I'm not knocking these guys.
I get what you're saying. It's few and far between the names that come out of the wrestling business that somebody doesn't have some kind of story to say, because it's human nature to kind of pick apart things anyway. And once you give them ammunition, it's a lot easier. And so right. Ricky Steamboat, all these years later, there may be somebody that didn't like something he did somewhere, I'm sure. But at the same time, you really don't hear anybody going around talking negative about him. But that's why you mentioned Sam Steamboat. We talked about Sam in the past. I tried to save Ricky for a later episode because we were so early in your career at that point in time. But I thought this might be a good time because you do work Ricky a couple times right around, well, his early time here in the business. So that's kind of interesting that you still recall those matches. And you, even then, when he was still very green or should have been green, he was pretty much a natural. So he wasn't as bad as maybe some of the other boys when they were breaking in.
Oh, yeah, I was able to have a match with him that was much more sophisticated than you would think with a fairly new guy.
Okay.
You know, he was able to do things, and I didn't even have to tell him. I could see the way he reacted to what I was doing just from the tie-up without me having to say anything. I'd go behind him, and he'd go into an arm, you know, in a wrist lock. I'd go to slam him, and I'd tell him to hold on, and he'd just take me over, and I'd kick out, and he'd arm drag me. And I mean, I'd get up and charge him. I didn't even have to tell him he arm dragged me. I realized that, you know, this kid had, he already had what it took to, you know, to get over because he looked great. I mean, he was not handsome as he could be. He was young, beautiful smile, a nice teeth. He was great. Wrestling is show business. Well, he presented a good show. He looked good.
Movie star quality looks.
Yes.
Right.
And so as long as he also, in his personal attitude with me, he was very respectful. I'm not afraid. He was very respectful and deferential. Thanked me effusively afterwards. Was very, again, I appreciated that people would do that because that's the way I was. People helped me out when I was starting. Now, later on, maybe not so much. I always say thank you. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes you wouldn't go any great lengths because you had gotten used to the fact that as a heel, even when I was booking myself and I could determine what the finishes were going to be, I still ended up getting beat 7 or 8 out of 10 matches. I ended up telling whoever I was working with to go ahead and beat me and tell them how to do it. But that's the benefit I had. I could tell how to get beat. There's ways to get beat, and there's ways to get beat where it doesn't hurt you. There's ways to get beat where it kills you. But no, Ricky was good from the get-go, and I saw him in Tampa with one of Barry Rose's get-togethers, his fan fest, and a few years ago, and he looked great. He was still very pleasant, had a great career behind him, and you know what's nice about him? He's a success story in the wrestling business. He's someone who got into it, and think about it, both Steamboats. I mean, whether either one of his name was really Steamboat, Sam in Hawaii and Ricky in Charlotte and WWE, they made great careers to where at the end of it, they come out of it, unlike so many unfortunate people, not just in wrestling, but you hear about it in pro football, pro basketball, baseball, guys who made fortunes, who now they're 40 years old, they're no longer able to play, and somehow they've lost all their money, or most of it.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that have those success stories out there.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah. Next name on my list, he's been sitting at the top of my list for a while. I knock a few off every once in a blue moon because you cross paths with them when we discuss them. But there's a name sitting at the top of here, and we just haven't gotten to him until now. And I'm happy to do that because I've been curious. I've seen stories in the past online of this guy, and his name is Dick Steinborn. Do you have any memories of Dick Steinborn?
Yes. Milo, his father, Milo Steinborn, was the regional promoter for the Florida promotion. He handled Orlando. Mm-hmm. And so, my first show in Orlando, I met Milo, and Milo had been a world champion power lifter.
Yes.
Not a bodybuilder, but a power lifter who had several world records lifting weights. The reason he had the records was because he could squat with 500 pounds, which wasn't a big deal, except the way the squat started, the 500 pounds were on the ground. There were the bars and the bell, well, the barbells, the weights were weighted, they were weighted on the floor.
Okay.
They weren't on a stand.
Right.
Nowadays, when they do the squat, it's on a stand. All the lifter does is get underneath it and stand erect, and then they remove whatever was holding the weights up, and then they do the squat.
Yeah.
Well, Milo was able to pick it up. What he had to do is he pick up one end and slide underneath it, and you have to squat down, and then you bring the whole thing. Yes, just imagine that on your knees. You have to bring the whole thing up onto your shoulders, and then you stand up. So that's why he had the world record, because nobody could get that first part done. But he was 85, I think, at the time, and he looked it, white-haired, and he had some great sayings. Too soon old, too late smart. He used to say that. Too soon old, too late smart. And he was respectful to me. He was very nice. His son Dick was a different story. Wrestlers are not the kindest people in the world. I seldom had somebody's name came up, would have people say, oh yeah, what a great guy. Usually nobody say anything, but if there was some way to say something, well, wait a minute, let me tell you this story about this guy. There'll always be one or two people who are happy to do that. Well, there were always stories about Dickie Steinborn. They were not flattering. It was, I worked a match or two with him. A great talent, and I watched him work. He was very, very, very good in the ring. I mean, excellent. But for some reason now he was smaller. His record, he competed for junior heavyweight championships when he first started, because that's the 220-pound range. He wasn't a real big guy, but he was a great hand in the ring. I remember training with him a few times. For some reason, I can't remember. I think it was in Orlando. He showed me a few things. So great talent. But I heard a story about him that might indicate why he had bad press. Russell was telling me about a story that he heard that Steinborn was going back and forth to Australia, probably for Barnett. And there was a wrestler who came over there who was kind of a rookie. Now, I could identify with that because I went over there when I was very young in my career. I went to Australia, and I remember I knew how to work, but I mean I wasn't a great worker yet, and it was all new and it was all very. Now, I did have the benefit of being older and experienced. I was a veteran. I'd finished college, so I'd been around a while. I traveled, but apparently a young wrestler who had broken into business got over there for Barnett, and he met a girl who was a groupie, and he fell in love with her, and so he had to leave, and he wanted to marry the girl. Apparently, this guy had never had a real girlfriend, so he was just head over heels in love to have some girl, come up. And she was a nice looking girl. Have come up to him and be apparently attracted to him.
Right.
So he arranged that 6 months later or a year later, he was coming back, and he'd been writing back and forth to the girl. And the girl wasn't a very nice girl. She let it be known what was going on and was sharing his letters with, at least with Steinborn. So what happened was this guy was coming back, and he brought a ring with him. He was planning on asking this girl to marry him. Mm-hmm. So Steinborn asked him to, the guy was going to get together with, his first day in, he was going to get together with Steinborn and go out and have lunch or something. So Steinborn said, well, okay, come on up to my room, and, when you get here, I said, I'll be up there taking a nap or whatever. And said, come on up to the room and knock on the door. So when the guy came up to the room and knocked on the door, now it was a room that you opened the door and you could see everything. It was small, like one small big room, had everything in it. So when the guy knocked on the door, Steinborn went and opened the door. Well, in the room, in the bed, was that girl that the guy had been planning to ask to marry him.
Wow, I was really hoping it wasn't going to go there.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. It's a horrible story.
Yeah.
But that gives you an idea of now, the boys would consider that a rib that is ha-ha-ha. The veterans would go, oh, well, that young fool, we saved him. He shouldn't have, we didn't want it. He shouldn't be marrying some groupie.
Right.
But, it broke that. I'm sure it broke the guy's heart, and I tell that story only again to give it's the only thing I know of that I heard that would give an idea of why Dickie had some serious critiques about why he had some negative things associated with his name. Again, he might have thought it was funny or, no big deal. But, and maybe just, to the boy, he grew up in the business or.
Right. Well, his father had been around you, like you said, forever, not only as a strong man, not only as a power lifter, but he had been wrestling since at least the 20s. I mean, he was wrestling Jim Londos and Primo Carnera. So to say Dick Steinborn grew up in the business, absolutely he did, because his father had been around the business since at least the 1920s. Right.
Well, again, maybe that was just no big deal to Dick, but I just to Dick Steinborn, but I empathize more with that poor Mark, or the new boy in the business.
Right. Well, no, Bob. When we look at it from a normal human being's point of view, absolutely, that Dick Steinborn is a piece of shit, right? If we're just telling the story, sitting around and just talking like normal human beings, my God, what an asshole! Absolutely, and of course the girl, we have words for her as well. But yeah, that's a really shitty thing to do from Steinborn. But we go back to the wrestling world, and these are the things that guys just did back. Yeah, go get you some, Dick. I mean, I'm certainly not backing Steinborn in that story at all. I mean, that's shitty. It's a shitty situation. But again, it's like you said, they could make up 40 different reasons why he did it. Hey, I did it for you, man, or whatever silly nonsense came back from that. But no, I get being crushed. I can only imagine if you were truly in love, you were going to propose to this woman, whether she was a good human being or not. To see this, I mean, your heart would certainly drop into your stomach. So I feel for the guy.
Well, you know what? In retrospect, let me add something to this story. It's just part one, really. The way I heard about it was, I mentioned this before, I think, but when we worked in Melbourne on, let's say Saturday night, and the boys were going to New Zealand on Sunday, and I wasn't booked for some reason. I don't know why. On this tour, I wasn't featured. I was a preliminary guy. I wasn't figured in main events. I wasn't going. They left me in Melbourne at the hotel. Well, that night, a lot of the girls would come from all over, not all over Australia, but from nearby towns. They would come to Melbourne, and they would stay at the same hotel that the boys stayed at. There might be as many as 15 or 20 of them. So this one night, one of the girls saw me down at dinner and came over and said, "Hey, we're having a little get together up in room so-and-so if you want to come out and have a beer or whatever." So I said, okay, I went up. But by the way, this is something that you should be part of this. At that time, they knew that I was not available as a potential lover because
sure,
I had
a candidate for the night, sure.
Yeah, well, I had a girlfriend, and I had been in territories where I saw the boys, some guys would be messing around with a groupie,
Sure.
And they would bring their girls to the matches, and the groupies would go right up and sit behind them or close by, and without the groupie actually exposing that they had a relationship, but what they were doing, just by doing that, they were humiliating the girlfriend. By the guy who was with that groupie was humiliating his girlfriend by bringing her to the matches, and then having those girls, all the groupies being able to sit around and laugh and make jokes about this girlfriend who apparently hasn't got enough going for whatever it needs, that her boyfriend doesn't need to go somewhere else for something, and be with a groupie. So I determined I was never going to do anything like that in my own career. I was never going to do anything, and I'm not trying to sound like Mr. Great Guy, but you have to try to have some self-respect. So I let it known in Australia that I wasn't interested in taking anybody to bed. I was planning on bringing my girlfriend over there. So that's the reason. I only tell that story, not to put myself over, but that's the only possible reason I could get involved to all the girls having a party up in one of the suites where there's 12, 15 girls up there. And what they're going to do is they're going to share stories about this weekend, this weekend and last weekend, and all the years in the past. Whatever, they're going to be telling stories, groupie stories. So you talk about being in a eclectic, unreal situation. I was up there and I was having a beer and I was kind of sitting in a corner. I mean, I wasn't. No, but they were ignoring me because I wasn't a potential boyfriend, or I wasn't going to be with any of them. So I got to listen to their stories, and one of the girls told that story. The girl that told the story was the one that had been in the bed with Dick Steinborn. That's where I heard the story. So, and they all laughed. The girls all thought that was funny because they were all groupies, and in groupie seniority, the girls
seniority. It's a union, man.
Yeah. And stature. There's a couple of things. It's like there's the category, the longest. Who has been doing this longest? Well, I had a guy that was here 30 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I was nine, and I was with this guy. There was also who had the main event guys who was with them and who had so the girls were looking for bragging rights. And so you heard all kinds of stories that were I'm talking, what a great lesson for me, because these girls, they laughed. They laughed at the wrestlers. They laughed at the boys. They laughed at how the boys would think that they were in charge of everything that was happening, and yet the girl manipulated them to buying, a case of beer and a bucket of chicken for everybody, for him to, be with her for a few minutes. And so it was a great experience for me. But
it's definitely a different perspective to be in, for sure.
Well, yes, it's just like I talked about with out there in San Francisco with Chris. I went to those places with Chris, those dives, those places that were, oh my God, I told you about. If I had this picture going in this club one night, I had this image of my dad and my dad was still alive, but I had an image of him like looking down at me. I blushed. I turned red. The girl I was with thought I had a heart attack or something. I said, "Why are you so red?" I just could imagine my dad. The stuff I was looking at in this club was so depraved, and just, I mean, it was all pantomime. Nobody was actually doing anything, but they were pantomiming like a gross orgy. All men. I imagine my dad watching me. Son, I thought I raised you right. What are you doing in this place? So, wanting to do that with Chris was I told you earlier again, I'm on record as I'm saying I was trying to educate myself about, the gay life.
Sure.
And here I had a perfect guide, a guy who was going to protect me, take care of me, watch my back, but, he pulled that great rib in the Y and the YMCA, having fun, both of us. It was because I laughed at that rib that he stuck with me. But I got mad at him. He wouldn't have anything to do with me. So it was that same mindset. And this sounds like Bob Roop trying to put Bob Roop over. But no, it was that same mindset of the thing in Australia. by being up there in that with those girls, I don't think there'd ever been a wrestler up there with them. They got to hear all that stuff and have an idea what they were with. I mean, I didn't ask, but I didn't see it happening.
Yeah, it's definitely a different situation. You never hear that version of, the take of everything that goes on there between you call them groupies. I believe most aptly put the arena rats, the ring rats, if you will. I'm just calling it like it is, Bob. And but clearly,
I avoided saying that.
Yeah, you always avoid using that term. So I'm sure a lot of ladies out there, if we have any lady listeners, I'm sure I know we have a couple, and I'm sure they appreciate that. But it is what it is. But it's it's kind of funny to watch the wrestlers think they're manipulating the girls, but hasn't it always been the girls that can manipulate the guys? So I mean, really,
exactly.
It's everybody working everybody in this instance, and it's kind of funny to know that just like the wrestlers, there's main eventers, there's mid-carders, there's preliminaries, and same thing over here on the other side with the ladies. So I'm a main eventer, I'm a mid-carder, and I'm just breaking in. I'm green. So it's kind of a funny situation there, but it's a interesting story. I've heard some stories in regards to Dick Steinborn. None that detailed. That's pretty rough. That's pretty rough on the other guy. I wish I kind of knew who that was that he did that to, but I don't know if they even went on to do much else. But yeah, that's crazy. Looking at a couple other names here, Bob. Another guy who doesn't really get what they call nowadays his flowers. And I mean, in regards to not really the respect he deserves from being in the business, somewhere close to 30 years, maybe more. I'm talking about a guy who transcended the black and white era over to the color TV set era. Abe Jacobs from New Zealand. Do you have any memories of Abe Jacobs?
Yes. My most recent memory, Abe, we lost Abe last year at age 95. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had a great long life. When I saw Abe, the last time I saw him, he was inducted in 2006. He was inducted into the Lou Thez, George Tragos Hall of Fame. I was there that year, so I got a chance to visit with him and all that. And I had not known. I wrestled with him. I wrestled in matches against him several times. And you given me his name. I did some research, but also I remembered one that I had mentioned it earlier of being in a tag team match against him and Haystacks Calhoun. The reason that match stood out was that I had talked about I was doing a little warm-up where I was bouncing up and down on one side of the ring, and all of a sudden the floor starts bouncing up and down and like lifting me off it. And I look over and Haystacks is over there jumping up and down like I was. Of course, him doing it all.
Right.
That big blubber, that big round tub or whatever.
Haystacks must have been in a good mood that night.
Well, I'm looking at it from a new point of view. What I didn't realize, what he might have been doing was he was like mocking me because I was a heel. I was all business. It wasn't personal.
Right.
He was like, hey, okay, but I was a heel, so he's mocking me. And I should have, if I'd have been smart enough, I was too green. If I'd have been a little smarter, I would have gotten all pissed out of shape, and gone over there and said, hey, how dare you mock me and all that, but I wasn't with it. But what I picked up and looking back through Abe's career, he and Haystacks at one time were a major league tag team. And I think it goes back to the days you told me about where Haystacks really had the physical ability to do all kinds of, really extraordinary things for a guy that size.
Right.
He could move around. He could go over the rope. He could do a lot of stuff. And so here we are, and here's Haystacks and Abe Jacobs had been champions and had gone against some of the top guys. Who knows who they went against, but top guys. And now here in a major venue, like I don't know about Madison Square Garden, but maybe something comparable in whatever territory they were in. And here we are in a little bywater in Florida that it's a spot show that runs about twice a year, and there might have been 100 people there. What I'm trying to lead around to or get to is that Abe was a part of that team, and I had no idea of his background. He was in the latter stages of his career.
Right.
And it says in his bio that, he started out and he had some pretty good success early, where he was in. I mean, this guy worked against Buddy Rogers 7 times.
Yeah.
Against Buddy Rogers. You know, I mean, that means something. He worked against Rufus for the World Championship. He worked against, he had a bunch of top matches against the top guys. But he was in his prime then. Now, he stuck around for another, 20 years. What they did, the kind way they put it, is they say you're a journeyman. Became a journeyman wrestler. Journeyman. That's like someone who knows the trade and is practicing the trade, but it's not your big star.
Yeah, and that really defined the rest of his career too. Just kind of went around from territory to territory. He did settle in the Mid-Atlantic for Crockett for a while there near the very end when he was basically slated doing prelims. But if you go back and watch some of that stuff, because that footage is out there from the early 80s, like right near the end. Now, he had been in the business 30 years by that point, so he was at least 50 plus years old. But you couldn't really tell it. I mean, I'm not saying he looked young for his age, but he certainly was still very capable, a good-sized guy. Yeah. But when you watched him get in the ring, depending on who he was in there with, he could still be salty. Yes, I'm up there in age. Yes, I'm working as a prelim guy, but I know exactly what I'm doing in here. And if you rub me the wrong way, I'm not going to make you look so good. And that was so fun to watch Abe Jacobs, depending on who he was getting in the ring with. You can go back and watch some of those early Georgia. We're covering Georgia on my territory show right now from 1981, and Abe Jacobs came through there for a couple of months just as a prelim guy, but depending on who he was working, you could really get some fun stuff out of him, because when he wanted to go, he was going to go. And if he, I'm not saying if he didn't like you, but if he wanted to try you a little bit, he would. And it was like, here's a guy who's much up there in his waning years. He's getting ready to retire, but he's letting you know, hey man, if I still have to go, I can.
Yeah. But reading his bio, don't get me wrong, I liked Abe, and I had respect for him personally, but I had no idea of the level of his stature. I mean, he had been at the very top, and then he stuck around. I mean, because there's seldom that you can stay there. I mean, even people like Ric Flair and all that usually have to keep winning back the world title to keep that stature. Once you do reach the top, it's hard to stay there. Some people are able to do it. Abe might have had some drawbacks to doing that, but he stuck around in one form or another. And when I looked at his total bio, his career would be one that I would be happy to have emulated if I stuck around the business. I like to travel. I got in the business to travel, and that's what he did.
In those peak years, though, Bob, I mean, you talk about a who's who. This guy started out working, you said, Buddy Rogers, Johnny Valentine, The Sheik, Wild Bull Curry, Eddie and Jerry Graham, Bruno Sammartino, Antonino Rocca. I mean, he had been around all of the stars. I mean, the elite stars of the 50s and the 60s. So by the 1970s, it was all cake to him. I mean, it was pin me, pay me, I guess you could say. But he was there for a while. And, I believe at some point after he retired, he was such a good guy, so trustworthy, that we talked about Ricky Steamboat. He owned a gym in the Carolinas there. And I know for a long period of time, Abe Jacobs was actually the manager. He handled the business side for Ricky Steamboat in his gym while Steamboat was out wrestling. So that just kind of shows you the man he was, because to be in the locker room with another wrestler and to trust them, to know that you feel you can trust them enough to run a business for you, that says a lot to his character.
Yes. And you know what? When I never had a chance to really talk to him, because he was a babyface.
Right, he's on the other side.
Yeah, I don't remember ever being in a dressing room with him, but at the Hall of Fame, I had a chance to talk to him and get to know him a little bit, and I really liked him. I mean, I thought he was a good guy, and he didn't brag. He didn't ever said, I worked with Buddy Rogers 7 times. Yeah, never bragged. But I look at a guy. He had 8,000 matches, which is about 5,000 more than I had, or maybe even more. He traveled. He said he went around the world 4 times, and he had 8,000 matches in 25 countries. Wow. Now that's my idea of what I would have liked to do. Right. If I had stuck around the business, I would have tried to have the same kind of career. Now, another thing about him not having like a patron or a sponsor or someone to take care of him in his later years, like, say, if Fritz Von Erich might have taken care of his own kids, or Eddie looking after Mike, or someone who has the promoters looking out for him. and keeping them on top. Maybe Triple H with Vince McMahon, although Triple H certainly had the talent, but Abe did too. Abe stayed in shape his whole life. When he came in 2006, he looked great. I mean, he didn't take off his shirt or anything, but he was lean and he didn't look anywhere near his age. So, yeah, he's another, in my mind, another success story, because even though he was managing Steamboat's gym, at the same time he had bought a farm back in New Zealand. He bought a farm there with sheep and cattle on it. So if you're going to buy you got to buy a farm with 1,000 sheep and 500 cattle on it. You got to have some money.
Sure.
So yeah, he saved his money and he did well. And the idea that he was handling Steamboat's gym for him. Well, think about it. Way to get out of the house every day, go to a place where you can work out, which you like to work out, and you're getting paid for it.
Right.
That was smart on his part. And also that the Steamboat trusted him with his money, because you can't trust just everybody with your money.
Certainly not other wrestlers. And Steamboat trusted Abe, right? So that says a lot for his character. See, even if we didn't have stories, you can kind of pinpoint certain guys and their character based on things that happen with them in their life. You also talk about Abe Jacobs, getting up there in age, early 50s, early to mid 50s. He's still wrestling in the early 80s. And Jim Crockett keeps him around on TV doing jobs for a few years there. And I think that says a lot too. Like, hey, we can't really push you at your age. We can't really do a whole lot with you, but we respect you. You make our other guys look great. You're a talent. We trust you. We know you're going to be reliable. So we're going to keep you around, the best way we can for a couple of years here. So I think that says a lot too, when a promoter's just going to use you to the best of your abilities, whatever they can do with you for a lengthy period of time, when they don't necessarily need you on the roster, but they still find you an asset enough to keep you in the locker room.
Well, I think the ingredient you're talking about that's missing from most wrestler or promoter relationships is respect. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that the promoters got away with stiffing wrestlers and never having it on their conscience, the reason they were able to steal money, was because so many of the boys they knew the guys were complaining about it, and yet nobody ever said anything to them.
Right.
So they lost respect for them, as for having character, because a guy can at least come in and ask for a raise.
Sure.
I mean, he might get it, but at least he can come and ask. And nobody ever did. And yet every night, those guys that were in the cars that were complaining about payoffs, I guarantee you that some of those cars, there was an office stooge in there who was going to somehow let it be known.
No doubt.
So were really blasting the office for the payoffs, blah, blah, blah. And so any wrestlers that were foolish enough to open their mouth, if they didn't know and trust and like 100% the guys they were with, well, that was a bad move on their part. So the office knew what was going on, and yet the boys never complained. They didn't give their notice. The promoters were able to, maybe, I don't know if any of them had a conscience, maybe money grubbing has no conscience, but they were able to excuse it by saying, hey, the guys are making a good living. They would have never made doing anything else. We found Tommy Rich, he was pumping gas. Now he's making $1,500 a week. So even though he deserves $2,500, he's still making a lot of money. He's making a lot more money than what had been making pumping gas.
Right.
So
it's funny how you can look at things that way when you're the promoter.
Yeah. If you get the money last, if you get it first, then you can make any decision you want.
Sure.
And I know it's really hard for people sometimes. That's what I always admired about Paul Bosch. He didn't let money influence his character.
Right.
He had a certain percentage that he paid. It didn't matter. He drew that house in Houston. I don't know. I never found out what the money was or what the gate was. Let's say it was $60,000. He paid Junkyard Dog $8,000. So he obviously paid Nick Bockwinkel $8,000. So out of that $60,000, after his costs, he might have ended up with $50,000. Well, he paid out of $50,000. He's already paid 16 of it to his two top guys.
Right.
Eddie Graham had that Golden Circle, $25 rank of 20, whatever it was, $5 ringside, Jack and Dory Jr. on top, Jack Brisco and Dory Jr., the one where I wrestled Johnny Valentine in the co-main event or semifinal, and Jack got $250.
That's absolutely insane. That's 10 front row seats, right? And that's it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Wow.
Paul Bosch, once he couldn't promote anymore due to whatever circumstances, he eased into his retirement and peace with himself and hopefully happy, and had good memories. And Eddie, we know what Eddie did. Right. So that's the difference, I mean, and those kind of things it's not something I'm happy about, but it's something, if you try to figure out why people do things, I prefer Paul's method to
certainly.
Eddie. Yeah. So,
the stories are always out there. The first name you always hear when it comes to good promoters that paid well, that were respectful to the talent, Paul Bosch is always at the top of the list. And, he's not here anymore. He's been gone for a long time, but his name's still batted around when it comes to the best paying promoters, the most, well respected, the guy who treated you the best as far as promoters go. And it always goes back to Paul Bosch. A couple other names pop up, from time to time as well, but Paul Bosch always seems to be at the top of that list. So certainly respected as a promoter. You've mentioned him here many a times, and I've heard him come up in other conversations as well. Steering back here to another name, Bob, we're going to try to get at least another name in here before we close up shop. How about Bugsy McGraw?
That's a good one. Yeah, I met Mike Davis when I broke into business in '69. He was working in Florida. And I'm not sure if he'd gone to Beautiful Brutus yet. It might have been Mike Davis. He was a big guy, 6'3", 290 pounds, whatever, 300. Big guy, and he was a decent enough worker. I mean, he wasn't, I don't remember seeing him do an arm drag or anything, but his work apparently was okay. I don't remember watching many of his matches, but he had a great, he was a character. He created that character in Bugsy McGraw that was, was successful for him. He was able to work at some length and time and make some money with it. But between us, we were just talking about Paul Bosch. Paul would, when he interacted with you, Paul would, like, for example, first time I went to his office, I'll repeat that he invited me to sit down in an area away from his desk. And we talked, and he was sitting, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 feet away in a chair facing me. And he was looking me in the eye and smiling and talking and let me get to know who he was. And he was like, well, he was very charming, and what he was warm and he was genuine. And I felt like he was the person I was talking to. I felt that was a person he really was. Now, I use that as an example because with Mike Davis, Bugsy, Beautiful Brutus, and I never, ever have talked to him where I felt like he was being, like his real name's Mike Davis, if he was being Mike Davis. I always felt that part of whatever time I ever interacted with him. And the last time I ever see him was down in Tampa. They have a thing all the wrestlers down there go to once a month, I think, where they have a get-together and they have lunch together. And I went down there one year with Barry Rose, and I saw him. In fact, that's the last place I saw him. And when he came walking up, he walked up with this grin on his face like, well, here I am. Aren't you happy to see me? And it took me a minute to figure out who it was. I said hi and everything, but I think he had a great career. I never got to know him very well. He wrote a book. I called it The Brood or something. I can't say anything negative about him. I haven't heard about him doing really horrible things. Mm-hmm. It's just that personally, what I'm saying is that he never gave me a chance to get to know him. Because when somebody's putting a character, adding any kind of a character or pseudo identity to their persona, that the persona they're presenting to you, when they're doing that, I can't help but feel something. There's something wrong here. And if it's not with me, I'm not mad at anybody. I'm not pretending to be anybody else. Old and fat, here I am. This is what you see, it's what you get. But the reason I used Paul Bosch was because Paul was sincere and genuine. He wasn't hiding anything. There was nothing in his body language or his mannerisms, his facial expression, or what he said, or his emotional output that gave me any pause of any kind that he was being anything different than what he really was. So when you go from something like that to someone who's put out all these, has got a bunch of signals out that are something's not really genuine,
No, and I get it. There's a lot of guys who work their gimmick, as you say. You talked about Dusty certainly turning it on most of the time in front of you. But Bugsy, he would go on to become mostly a heel throughout the 70s. In the 80s, he turned babyface in most of the territories he worked. And he worked this kind of fun-loving kid character, kind of goofy. But his ad-lib promos that he would do sometimes, even like he did an interview with Jerry Lawler in the Memphis territory on the Lawler show, and clearly that was just all ad-lib and just on the spot. You could tell at the end of the day, and I don't know what he was like outside of the business, but you could tell he was a fun-loving guy who was liked to joke around a little bit. So I was just curious if you ever saw anything, or heard anything about Bugsy. But clearly it was just somebody you didn't really cross paths with a whole lot in regards to spending time around him. I was just curious because he seemed to be in the Florida territory more often than not throughout the 70s. He does have a cup of coffee up in New York during that period as well. But I know you guys were working for Florida at the same time, at least at some points here. So I figured I'd throw that name out there.
Well, what you just said, Ray, is very helpful because maybe that's what I picked up on. When I remember I was getting ready to walk into the restaurant, I think it was a restaurant that we were going to be going into, and Bugsy was coming down the sidewalk from the other direction. He had parked on the other side of the restaurant. I was coming, say, from the east. He was coming from the west. And as he's walking up to me, he's got this smile and kind of a smirk on his face. Well, I was wondering what's so funny, but maybe if it was just him being Bugsy, good-humored, ready to joke around and be pleasant and all that. Mm-hmm. He was just being himself. Think about it. Once he's on the scene, once he's where all the wrestlers are, well, he's back in character. He's coming back as Bugsy. Now, my character, Bob Roop, I had that persona, Mayhaw Singh.
Sure.
But most of the time I was Bob. And, I didn't have anything to put on or take off. I just, hi, how you doing? That's all I had to offer. But I mean, if I mean it, if I'm sincere, it's good to see you. I hope it means something. I'm the same business you were for all those years. So anyway, but again, nothing negative to say about him in terms of, only thing is, like I say, I didn't feel like I had a chance to get to know him at all. And a lot of that is very likely my own fault.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time out this week to kind of go back and revisit some of the names that were prominent, not just in the 70s, but prior to and even after in regards to a Don Muraco or a Bugsy McGraw. But of course, we go all the way back and talk a little bit about Dick Steinborn, Abe Jacobs. So it was really fun to get through that and finish up your time here, your huge run through 75 and 76, all the way into February of 1977 in Florida. Of course, up next, you took off to San Francisco. We already covered that at length. So pretty soon, guys, we're going to dive back in to your time here in the 1970s. And that, of course, means your trip to the Knoxville territory, working for one Ron Fuller. Can't wait to get there. Now, will that be the next episode? It's hard for me to say. I got to look into my notes and see if I'm ready and prepared for that one. That's going to be a doozy when we dive into that. And I want to be fully prepared, Bob, but want to thank you so much for taking the time out and doing another episode this week. Been a fun time, and it's so much more to get into still.
Yeah, you gave me a perfect sign-off, but I'm going to screw it up. One thing I like to mention, it came to me when we were talking about Stomper throwing down his paycheck and Frankie Kane racing to the bank with his sights still on to cash his check. There was another place involved with a check. It's not in Knoxville, but it's shortly thereafter, whereas Randy Savage, Angelo Poffo had written a check to me for over $5,000, and there was a moment in time where when I was actually at the bank, that they called Angelo to ask him about honoring the check, and he was up in the air about what he was going to do. But I just say this. Before I tell you, we'll talk about it when it comes up. Mm-hmm. If he hadn't, and Randy Savage would have never made it to New York. I would have taken him and his dad out that day, even if I went to jail for it. I've been over. I mean, I ate crow and bent over backwards to earn that $5,000. If they were going to screw me out of it, they were going to have to pay in blood and guts and bruises and broken bones. So, but we'll save that for another time. Thank you for today, Ray. I come into these episodes sometimes hoping that between the two of us, we'll be able to fully flesh out things. Mm-hmm. And you've never disappointed me. As sometimes as inadequate as I feel and what I have to offer, between the two of us, we seem to get it just about everything fairly well fleshed out.
Well, it's always a good time.
Oh, it is. And it is. It's just, it goes so fast, and it's such a privilege. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank all our listeners out there, too. Thank you for being here with us. We look forward to talking to you again. Thank you, Ray.
Absolutely. And all right, guys, I do believe that's going to wrap it up here for this week. But stay tuned. We got a lot of great topics coming up here on the program. I encourage everybody to go out there, friend Mr. Bob Roop over at facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.